shooting just up or for?
Testing 1, 2, 3. On. Yeah, okay. Yes.
Yep. 1, 2, 3, test. We're running a little bit.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Jakarta, and good morning to everyone who's joining in from Germany. Welcome to FPCI Virtual Public Forum. Today, we are honored to host Her Excellency Jennifer Morgan, the State Secretary and German Federal Foreign Office Special Envoy for International Climate Action, for a live conversation on climate change and the way forward from ambition to action. For that, we would like to first of all give a warm welcome to Her Excellency who have joined us here. Welcome, Madam State Secretary Jennifer Morgan. Today's session will be moderated by the founder and chairman of FPCI, Dr. Dino Patijalal. Welcome, Dr. Dino. In this event today, we are joined by participants coming from over 30 countries all over the world. They are not only coming from Indonesia and Germany, but also from Australia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Pakistan, Ukraine, Afghanistan, China, Myanmar, Brazil, Somalia, Switzerland, and many more. Ladies and gentlemen, today we will listen to an interesting conversation regarding international climate action and cooperation, especially with Indonesia and Germany are holding important presidencies of important international platforms, namely Indonesia with its G20 presidency and also Germany with its G7 presidency. So without further ado, let me invite the moderator of today's session, Dr. Dino Patijalal. Dr. Dino, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and I'm very pleased to welcome Germany's State Minister and Federal Government's Special Envoy on International Climate Action, Jennifer Morgan, and who I know in my other capacity as a member of the board of World Resource Institute, which, if I may say, is one of the best think tanks in the world for sustainable development. There's a ranking, actually, so I'm not making this up, right? So very nice to see you, and welcome to Indonesia. I'm going to welcome you with pantun, Indonesian style.
Wonderful.
Bavaria offers fine excursion. Lovely province with some great campsites. Welcome to Jakarta, Jennifer Morgan. Looking forward to hear your insights. All right, let's give a big hand, everybody in this room. All right. So, welcome, Madam Secretary, and it's nice to have you here. And you know, you've been appointed as Special Envoy of the State Secretary of the German Federal Foreign Office for International Climate Action. And obviously the key word is action here, because after COP26 we have a good plan, but how is that going to be executed? So I would love to hear your comments on how is it gone on the action side so far after Glasgow. Yeah.
Well, first of all, it's wonderful to see you again, and thanks for the invitation to be here on this exciting platform and such important debates. We need more of these types of discussions, I think, moving forward. I mean, how is it going? I think if we're honest about it, I think it's quite mixed. I think we see the impacts of the climate crisis that are happening around the world, from the drought to the floods. I started my term with my first trip to Bangladesh, meeting people there who are on the front line. Indonesia is also highly vulnerable with the heat waves. And it's pretty clear that we all need to step it up. And that was part of the Glasgow outcome, was to say everybody needs to be doing more, increasing our ambition, while at the same time having developed countries take the lead, but can't do it alone. And so I think the other thing coming out of Glasgow was a real recognition that the impacts are hitting, and therefore we need to also increase the level of ambition on things like adaptation. But you know, on the other side, I have to say, in the midst of this horrific war, Russian war of aggression on Ukraine, I think what Germany's working very hard to do is to accelerate the pace and the scale of the transition to renewable energy and energy efficiency, because we see how we need to be independent and phase out fossil fuels, Russian coal, oil, and gas, but also we know from the scientists we need to do that across the board.
Yeah, so two big crises at the same time, climate as well as Ukraine. Yeah. And I feel for you as you know, FPCI is taking a very strong stand against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We'll get back to that later. I want to ask you, how is Germany transforming words into action, and especially in the energy sector? And what are the challenges that you see making that energy transition there?
Sure thing. I mean, I think the first thing for viewers, we have a new German government. Climate change is a top priority, also with continuing with the war, but it remains a top priority. Also domestically. So how we're turning it into action is a proposal that we've put forward, 500-page list of laws to accelerate our energy transition. So that means increasing our renewable energy share in electricity to 80% by 2030, making it faster and easier to actually build wind turbines, moving forward in goals and laws on solar, on rooftops, energy efficiency, coal phase out, aiming for 2030, with a carbon neutrality goal of 2045. So those were all goals coming into the government, but we really are moving to, by summer, hopefully we should have those as new laws. And the other piece, of course, is within the European Union. We have something called the Fit for 55 package, which is the EU increasing its target to a 55% reduction by 2030, below 1990. That also is a jump in ambition, also a set of 17 directives. So really moving from words into action, into legal frameworks to build up renewable energy and energy efficiency.
Yeah, are you? I mean, you mentioned Germany turning the climate ambition into laws, which means if you don't do it, it's illegal, right? You violate the law. But are you concerned that much of the countries that submitted the NDCs at COP26 are simply submitting emission reduction targets, but not having any law that require them to do so? Do you think that's a mismatch there?
I think it's absolutely a mismatch. And I think you asked about challenges. I think that's one of the challenges, is actually turning things into legal frameworks, because otherwise the signals don't go to the private sector. I mean, we're doing this because we understand the climate science. We're also doing it to remain a leading economic power in the world, right? And so I think if you want to do that, then you need to give those clear signals to business as well. But we're seeing lots of, I mean, it's mixed. I mean, I think I'm hoping that by the next COP, we'll see the legal frameworks being put into place, including here in Indonesia on renewable energy. Because without that, I think the other challenge is public engagement and trust, whether it be trust between developed and developing countries, but also trust with our own public, that we are moving forward in a socially just way, because we need to make sure that people who have less income don't get hit hardest by this transition, but also trust in the government that will actually deliver.
Yeah, and also if you have put it into laws, then you sort of resilient against the political up and down, right? So for the long term, you have the legal instruments to guarantee climate action moving. Otherwise, the next political leader may have no interest in climate and can change things around, as happened during the Trump years. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we've seen that, well, first of all, you need long signals for investment, but I think climate has to be an issue in all a government approach, and it also has to have laws that will withstand different governments coming in. I mean, we had 4 years of a Trump administration where the world continued to move forward on the Paris Agreement, but we lost those years in the context of the United States. Certainly, we're all looking forward to hopefully hearing from President Biden on what they're going to be putting forward again in terms of laws and regulations on the national level. This is it's an urgent issue. You know, we have to have global emissions by 2030, which means we need those laws put in place as soon as possible, but they need to stay. And they need to be across the different sectors. They also need to be about our financial systems. We really need everybody to come in and play their role.
Yes, you've been meeting a lot of people here today. You met Minister Luhut and you had good discussions with the climate officials and so on. And as you know, Indonesia has begun to adopt progressive climate policies, net zero by 2060 or earlier, and programs on mangroves and forest reforestation and so on. But also the big question is on coal.
Yeah.
Can we effectively phase out coal given the socio-economic and political challenges? I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on how Indonesia can effectively make this energy transition?
Well, I had very inspiring meeting this morning with Minister Luhut. I think we have a G7 presidency this year. Indonesia has a G20 presidency, and we actually discussed how we can move with an energy transition from the G7 signal there to the G20 to a delivery. And I think the key elements are pretty clear. I mean, that what we've learned and actually what experience here as partners, I think, with Indonesia. Number one is, what the presidential decree on renewables. So really having an ambitious target there and having the policy frameworks, as we were saying, so that it's clear how you're going to move forward to scale up PV, which seems like a tremendous opportunity here, also for job creation, et cetera. But then also on the vital issue of coal, which is a big challenge. I think there it's a mixture of things. I mean, hopefully we see the coal moratorium, but actually see an earlier phase out into 2040, which is we're aiming at 2030. But I think for emerging economies like Indonesia, that's what scientists are telling us, the International Energy Agency. And then looking at what about the plants that are in the pipeline now. And that's where there's a very active conversation happening to see if we can create together with other G7 countries a just energy transition partnership to have that whole package moving towards that net zero economy, but specifically in the energy sector, working together to look at the know-how that is here and needed, the financing packages, the clear laws that are needed here, because I mean, I think it's pretty clear from all of the science and also just the impacts of coal on local on people, on health, that it's actually something from the past. And we have this moment right now with our two presidencies to really be taking this as a turning point to shift into solar PV, to shift into efficiency, and to have Indonesia really become a powerhouse on those industries. And that does mean the challenge, and I think that's what we're also talking about openly, of what is a just transition, also for Indonesia and its people.
Yes. How are you going to move the position of China and India on coal in this global energy transition?
Good question. I mean, I think with India, Germany actually just signed last week a set of agreements with the Indian government on sustainable development. We're also speaking with them and others about how they have very ambitious solar targets, how we can support them in doing that, but it's also getting those frameworks in place domestically. So it's this mixture, I think. I think it's also with China looking at different tracks. I would separate India from China. I think with India, there's a good dialogue there. I sense there's a very big interest of the government to move out of coal, seeing the benefits for people on health, air pollution, et cetera, but also the massive opportunity for India for production there, but also for positioning itself globally in the renewable energy market. With China, I think it's a mixture of dialogue, but also we are looking in the European Union for what kind of signals need to be sent to countries that if they don't have a carbon price in place, what does that mean when they export into the European Union? And seeing how we, as we move forward in partnership, but also making it very clear to a country like China, we need to move forward. We're in an emergency. Our industry is ready to go. German industry is committed to going to zero, whether it be steel, chemical, energy, but they also need to know that there's a level playing field around the world.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that we got to aim to phase out coal 2040, and for some countries 2030 or even earlier.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, again, there may not be a perfect answer to this. What would be the game changer or game-changing event or game-changing force that will allow us to reach that target or even reach it even sooner? Would it be finance? Would it be technology? What do you think would be that game-changing thing?
I think that's the challenge with this issue. It's probably, I would say, 3 different things at least, and that have to come together. I think it is getting those national policies in place. Without those national policies, it's very difficult. That national policy will then give those clarity for the investment. It's clear that we need to shift the trillions. We've been talking about this for a long time. We need to get the mixture between the public finance that comes and private finance that comes, even philanthropic finance that comes. But for that, you need to have the clear rules and laws that are in place. On the technology side, I'm actually quite optimistic. And I think we are seeing that in the renewable energy, I mean, the costs have just dropped dramatically. So for a country like Indonesia now to step in, it's a good moment to come in because of the, you know, economically, cost-wise, it's less expensive than fossil fuels. I think where we need what we can get on the quantum leaps on the technology is on things like battery storage. But I think as those signals come on the goals and on the finance, and then also in the research and development. I know in Germany there are big institutes and our government institutions looking, that's another race for markets, right? Who's going to crack the battery technologies that are there? So I think those 3 things have to come together. At the end of the day, it's I think it's really about leadership. We know the facts. We've been talking about this for decades. It's about leadership. It's about courage. I think as well to be listening to youth and to be thinking about their needs, listening less maybe to existing industries that are there and working with them to transition into what will be and has to be the new industrial revolution, right, around the world.
Yeah. Would you agree that this is really the first collaborative global project on a global issue to save the world, where everybody really has to work together, or otherwise the result is not going to be a happy result?
I think we have to, absolutely, we all have to work together. I think we have to do it at different levels.
Yes.
I think that's also why we have kind of an overarching climate foreign policy in Germany now. So yes, on the multilateral level, but there's a lot we can do on the plurilateral level, like these partnerships that we're looking to work together to phase out coal or to phase in renewables. And then also the bilateral levels. We have to work it on all, especially because of the short time frame that we have. And I think it has to be and can be the place where we continue to show that multilateralism works, it is important, and that we can drive forward even if there's an actor or 2 that doesn't want to come with us at that specific moment.
Yeah. Well, it brings me to my question on Russia. You mentioned about G20 and G7, and obviously climate change needs a global cooperation, global solution, and Russia is the 4th largest emitter, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, but as we know, G7 and Russia now are not in good terms. There are very little area of cooperation, if any. And with G20, it's going to be problematic as well. I'm just wondering how we're going to achieve our global climate goals, and at the same time we have this problem of Russia and G7 not cooperating.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is, you know, we will continue to work for peace.
Yes, obviously.
And I think we have to end this war. Putin needs to stop this madness of what's going on, and obviously we're working for that to happen as soon as possible. But I think as that's happening in parallel, we need to be working with all partners to drive the zero carbon economy forward and shift, as I was saying, out of fossil fuels. So we're very committed to do that. Obviously, you're seeing on the Russian side as quickly as we possibly can in Germany and the European Union. But I think multilaterally, we need to keep our eye on the ball of the 1.5 degrees goal and be working with other partners to drive that forward and not allow single actors to stop us. We talked about the Trump years beforehand. I think we managed to do that then, despite actually quite an aggressive climate denier sitting in the White House. And I think that's what we have to do now. So, and if we ever needed to see how peace, energy security, and climate fit together, you know, this is this moment. So you talk about kind of critical factors. For me, there's disruptive moments that happen when there's so much change going on in the world. Those are the moments that we have to step into together. So I think for the G7 and the G20 to say we are going ahead with our climate goals, not only we're going to accelerate it, and then in between have the G20 signal on renewable energy and energy efficiency. I think that's also a strategy that says to Russia, we're not holding back, we're moving forward.
Madam State Secretary, Chancellor Olaf Scholz has revealed a plan for a G7 climate plan based on ABC model. A, ambitious, B, bold, and C, cooperative. Can you tell us more about this?
Sure. I think there's a couple of key priorities for the G7. I think the Chancellor is looking both at how we increase the ambition. And I think that's both for the G7 to be looking at how the G7 can lead with coal phase outs, with pledging to not fund fossil fuels anymore, also to pledge to increase ambition, but also to look at the Chancellor's very keen on creating or to looking at how we can be working collaboratively, specifically in energy intensive industries, to have those industries work towards a 1.5 consistent pathway through industrial decarbonization. And so I think that'll be part of, so we're not only looking at its energy, but we're looking more broadly at those industries, and then also really working to give those roadmaps moving forward.
You know, globally we're seeing rising energy price, food security, more inflation, more global hunger, and disruptions of supply chain, and you know, all these things are just being created like ripples out of the Ukraine war and other issues. I'm just wondering, in the midst of this difficult global environment, how do we adjust? How do we achieve a socially just energy transition, and what would it look like, drawing from Germany's experience?
Well, first of all, I think it's essential. I think we've learned over the years that we have to think these things together. I think the ingredients are to also be socially progressive. So I think in Germany, for example, we had a just transition agreement when we decided to phase out coal, worked very closely with labor unions to look at how to invest in the regions that are coal dependent so that workers have a future. So that means training packages for them. That means ensuring in Germany we have a good social security network, but in countries that don't, you know, looking at those issues. I think it's also, though, for consumers, making sure that those who are the poorest in society don't have to pay any higher costs. Those are all things that governments have in our hands. That means when you're developing a national policy, thinking about that part of the population, whether it be the workers themselves or the consumers in that, so that they're not bearing any burden, but actually can have the benefits together. I think it also means right now from developed countries like Germany, really, as you mentioned, food issues and security, I mean, it's huge concern right now, working with the UN Secretary General, but others, to be looking at how we can be contributing to making sure that we don't have a food crisis, food security crisis. I mean, the prices are, and the import dependency are very large there. And I guess lastly, in a way, it's a moment to reflect about how can we each be more localized in how we're developing our economies, making sure that we stick with our, for example, for us, our sustainable agricultural goals, and not just going back to big agricultural production, but really reflecting on how we can be localized, resilient, investing in adaptation, and developed countries working to also support food security, water issues with developing countries, but to have that broader perspective. Because we are in that disruptive moment where I think this idea of being so globalized supply chains, you know, and how interdependent we are. Yes, we will remain interdependent, but what can we also be doing at home?
You know, I remember when I was in college, my professor was discussing justice, and he said that that's the hardest word to define, and we had a long, endless debate on what justice means. And the reason why I'm mentioning this, from where you're sitting, from your office, when people talk about just transition with regard to climate change, what does that word just mean? Yeah.
I think you're right. There's many different components, and I think there's part of the just transition which is to do with different workforces that have to transition out of their jobs because more quickly, because of the climate crisis, whether that be coal, whether that be farmers or that are, you know, deforesting but need alternative livelihoods there. It's really looking at that piece. But also I think there's an intergenerational justice part there. In Germany last year we had a finding of our Supreme Court which basically said that young people have a right to a stable future, and therefore the government needed to increase our ambition, our targets, so that they don't have a completely chaotic future where they, you know, with the impacts hitting hard. So there's definitely a generational justice. And then there's obviously a north-south climate justice component too, knowing that developed countries are more responsible. And so how do we as developed countries work to support developing countries, whether it be in you know, decarbonization or renewable energy, or whether it be on adaptation, much big topic for upcoming COP, or even on the issue of loss and damage. You know, many countries, but particularly the poor around the world, are losing homes, they're losing their livelihoods. How do we work together on that?
Yes. So the concept of inclusion, inclusive development must be part of the answer as well. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You mentioned young people, and there's quite a lot of young people who are watching our talk now. I'm just wondering if, what would you say to them to realize that they are really important players for climate future?
I just can't overstate how important they are. Not that they have the responsibility. I think we have the responsibility, and I get frustrated when all of a sudden, oh, the youth are involved, now we can just relax. No. So I think what I have seen happening around the world is the pressure and the attention they bring to the issue, whether it be to policymakers or to companies to say, we don't want to buy high carbon polluting products, we want the low carbon green products, or whether it be at the breakfast or dinner table with their parents. In Germany, I can say that has had a huge impact. So number one is, I think, keep up the pressure, identify what you're seeing as the gaps, because their voices are being heard and are having a difference also in shifting mindsets, I think, and the urgency of what, and then the other, well, I think looking at this upcoming COP is just to stay engaged, to make sure that you're participating in the discussions going into the COP, that there is, you know, we're working to make sure that there's strong NGO engagement, as there always has been in the COPs, and youth movements are a key part of that. So whether it be at the dinner table, on the streets, on social media, my gosh, keeping up that pressure, because it matters, and I think they have more to lose than just about anybody else. Obviously poor and marginalized, but they're going to live with whatever gets done or doesn't get done in the next 5-7 years.
Yeah, well, I've observed in Indonesia and some other countries, some of the young people have a cynical attitude, cynical that the problem exists, or cynical that we will be successful, or cynical in the efforts by governments and so on. I'm just wondering if in Europe there's also some degree of cynicism among the young people.
Sure, sure. I think there is cynicism. I think, though, if I may, I think the couple key things to remember. Number one is every 1/10 of a degree increase matters, So I think sometimes you hear, oh, it's not going to happen, it's too complex. You know, the difference between a world that is at 1.5 degrees versus 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, those are hundreds of thousands of people's lives that come into those tenths of a degree, or tipping points where we lose ecosystems, right? Or where the glacier bursts happen and hit villages below. So I think just to not put it in a black and white frame, but really know that those different, every tenth of a degree matters. And then I think also to know that you're not alone just in Indonesia or in wherever you may be sitting there, but you're part of a much more global movement. And so I think that is important to remember. And you know, cynicism is the enemy of change, positive change in the world.
Yes.
And I think we have seen that when small groups of people come forward and move forward, that there can be a big shift. We've seen that in many different fields. So don't let that get the better of you.
Yeah, I really believe that, because I mean, for folks who are watching this, there's not a single historical achievement that was achieved by someone who's cynical. You know, it's always by somebody who believes against all odds, right? Yeah, so I hope young people recognize this. I want to take some questions from some of our viewers. The first one is going to be Pamela Simamora from IESR. Oh, wait. Oh, sorry. So because she's not accessible by camera, I'm going to read her question.
Okay, great.
What will you do in your capacity as the Special Envoy for International Climate Action to press China to stop doing coal spree both domestically and overseas? And how can Germany help countries like Indonesia, which are still keen to build their own industrial capacity, achieve their goals sustainably?
Great question. Right to the heart of it. I think what Germany can be doing with China is, on the one hand, working together to collaborate around specific things like coal phase-outs, like our experience on just transition in Germany, to share that, to be looking at how do you create a carbon market, and all of the things that we have, so that because there are very active and commitments in China to move forward. But clearly that we also need to be working with partners to continue to pressure China, whether it be on how, you know, what they're doing domestically and the opportunities there. I mentioned before the question of exports from China that are very carbon intensive, that's not actually what we're looking for anymore in Europe. So that's a big incentive, I think, there. Also working with other actors to show that there's a different way forward. I think not only China, but other countries, if they see, for example, Germany and Indonesia moving forward to phase out coal, to phase up renewable energy, well, that then starts shifting the whole geopolitical dynamics that are there. And if that's happening across the board, then I think that also has an impact on what China is doing. I think in relation to Germany and Indonesia, we have a long history of collaboration. I think what we can be doing is a mixture of things. I think partially it's really project collaboration, which we're doing on things like renewable energy, geothermal, out in the field, and really trying to show how it can work. I mean, I think that's working together. I think the other is, you know, Germany has a long history of vocational training. The workforce for these things don't come from nowhere. You need to actually be having an education system, so sharing our experiences there, sharing our experiences on the policy side, and then on the financing, working Germany with other countries to see how can we leverage the investments into Indonesia that will make that quantum leap away from coal, figuring out the decommissioning of coal plants here and moving into PV, geothermal, other forms of renewable energy.
Yeah, well, your embassy in Jakarta will be very busy.
Yeah, they will. Every embassy for Germany, I mean, Jakarta, very busy, but as I said, it's top priority.
Yes. I want to take question number 2 from Laitania Belai Jandam from Indigenous Youth Climate Activist.
Hi, my name is Laitania Belai Jandam, and I am a Dayak Indigenous environmental activist from Indonesia. At COP26, it was announced that at least $1.7 billion will be given to indigenous peoples and local communities in recognition of their key role in protecting the planet's land and forest. This pledge is led by several countries, including Germany. However, these kinds of financial promises always lead to questions such as whether or not the people will receive the money at the end of the day, and what assistance will they receive in using and managing the money effectively. My questions are, where is Germany right now in realizing this pledge? What funding mechanisms and standards will you be using in fulfilling this promise? And in what ways do you believe the money can be used to alleviate social and climate inequalities within indigenous peoples and local communities? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think you've raised a whole range of different issues of what is absolutely vital. So Germany remains, committed to the pledge that we made. We're working across the government to see how to look within. We're currently in our that process with our parliament, but this is a priority issue for Germany. We've worked for many years, first of all, recognizing not just the importance, but the vital nature of indigenous peoples, indigenous knowledge. We see across the world that where indigenous peoples are involved in forest protection, that's where the forests are most intact. So I think in terms of making sure that the funds are well used, for me, the first step is always in the listening and having it be driven from them, not from us. And setting up those types of dialogue forums where, of course, the representation is the majority from the indigenous peoples' organizations. I think the other thing that we can be doing is, in terms of alleviating social inequalities, is again, really, making sure the funds flow, but also making sure the decision making is there and that the funds are going to the places where they're most needed. And there, I think there is still a gap between, the pledges and then the actual delivery. And we hear that from many different actors. So I think that's a key issue actually right now, also going into the next COP, to make sure that the money the funding is landing where it's most needed.
Okay. I have a question from Divya from Jakarta Post. Indonesia delayed the rollout of its carbon tax on coal power plant emissions to July. What's your perspective on this delay and what are the effects?
I think certainly having a tax or a price on carbon is a key part of the policy mix. We know that. So, I mean, I think as soon as that could be moved forward by the government, I think that would be prudent. In what I'm understanding is a priority now to move forward towards the G20 presidency on that energy transition. I think you need to then, as we were talking about before, make sure that it's coupled with a social mechanism, and also, is combined. My experience is that pricing is extremely important, but you also need those targets. You need to make sure that moratorium gets enforced on coal. You need to look at, okay, where the phase out dates, and that have that tax or pricing as part of the policy mix that's needed.
Okay. We have a question from Melissa Kowara, climate activist. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Melissa from the Green Party of Indonesia. Now, despite having pledges and ambitions, countries within the G7 and G20 are still consistently investing in mining, fossil fuel, monoculture plantation, and harmful big-scale infrastructure that exacerbates the climate crisis, literally the opposite of what the science is begging us to do. Now, we must acknowledge by now that the critical issue is the conflict of interest at policy-making level, which not only stops real ambitions from being made, but also hinders turning even the weak ones into action, despite already having all the solutions, as the latest IPCC report made very clear to all of us. Now, my question is this: how will Germany's G7 presidency bypass the politics to avoid climate catastrophe? Thank you.
Great question.
Good question, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to face the politics head on and work to shift it. I mean, I totally agree that we need to have a governance across the board, and I think where transparency, where independence is front and center, so that governments can be making clear decisions based on science and input. I think the other thing in the way of bypassing maybe national politics is working to make sure that people are aware of the benefits of going in a different direction. Because I think oftentimes it's a very hard thing. I mean, your countries have moved forward in certain ways, companies have moved forward and benefit in certain ways for decades, right? And we're now talking about shifting that. And I think in order to do that, then, well, we need public engagement, because I think we see that a world that is moving away, say, from coal towards renewables has many benefits, and we need large-scale shifts also to drive down the costs, but also that those players are as engaged. But in order to do that, I think it has to be, in a way, a combination. The G7 presidency, I think we're working to set those goals, and that, and then to follow up and make sure, because I think that's a key thing that needs to always happen. We're looking to see how can pledges for phasing out coal actually make it into a country's national target that they commit under the UN and then report on it. I think that can also help. But then I think that we need, to be working with progressive companies that want to go in that direction, and also hear from the public of what they want to see.
Okay. I know this one. This is actually a question from the smartest teenage climate activist I know. I'm not kidding. She's been on many of our programs. Emma Bati Sukarta from Bye Bye Plastic Bags. I think
yes.
you must be in Bali, right? Emma?
Jakarta, so I'm the head of Bye Bye Plastic Bags Jakarta. One of the branches of Bye Bye Plastic Bags that started in Bali. I was in Bali for a month. I just got back a couple days ago.
Okay, it's great to see you. Yeah. And I mean it, you are the smartest, one of the smartest young kids, teenagers that I know. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Dr. Dino, it's nice seeing you again.
Okay, go ahead, ask your question.
Good afternoon, Ms. Morgan. I've loved hearing your thoughts. It's truly an honor to be invited to ask this question. So I've been hearing you talking about the relationship specifically between developed nations and developing nations. However, I'm personally super interested on your thoughts on what you were saying about poverty specifically. So of course, as most people will know, a major obstacle in climate change movement with many countries around the world are countries, particularly like Indonesia, is poverty. People who don't have the luxury to educate themselves or to change their lifestyle to be more climate conscious. And I feel specifically here in Indonesia, most of the conversation when looking at poverty is directed towards how developed nations can support developing nations, as opposed to how developing nations can actually support their own community and people in poverty, and ways in which they can make better education programs as well as change the lifestyle. So my question is, what are your thoughts on countries like Germany and Indonesia who differ significantly in such aspects such as minimum wage, work environments, poverty gap and rate, economic state, etc. How can they work towards finding ways to encourage and include the poor in embracing climate change policies and sustainable living?
Another great question. Thank you. I think the current German government, is a government that is connected by, I would say, social, ecological transformation, and that also means thinking about poverty, whether it be in our country or in others. And I think there, what we can be doing and what we need to be doing is, well, first of all, making sure optimally that it's possible to have a social safety net. That might be easy to say, but I think we see even in developed countries where that doesn't exist, the gap between rich and poor is growing. And so I think having that be a priority and having people ask for that, I think, is quite important. I think the other thing that, the kind of connection there is, if we think about, I know in Indonesia it's less of a problem, but if you think about electrification and you think about making it affordable to have your own solar PV, then it's a mixture of national policy, but then also really having large engagement, education, communication on the ground with people, so that they even know that it's available, and getting out there into villages, into towns, to be bringing forward those solutions and looking at actually how do you connect. And I think another thing that I've just seen in various places where I've been is the level of, often from, I have to say, from women, small business opportunities where poor communities, poor people have taken very, basic steps of moving forward in entrepreneurship. But for that, you need to have, I think that's a priority also for the German development approach. You need to have those kind of incentives that are there. So it's a mixture, I think, of really looking at that social safety net, certainly some of those basics that are there, figuring out then, what is everything from your tax structure in your country, who pays for that, and then looking really very specifically at the opportunities, because I think that there's all kinds of desire to build a better life, of course, and I think when those opportunities are provided, or the chances, then they're often taken up in an active way.
Great answer. I hope you're pleased with that answer,
So
Emma.
Yeah, 100%. So much.
Okay. And say hi to your parents and all your friends who are doing great work at the Bye Bye Plastic Bags. Yeah. Okay.
I hope you've been doing well, Dr. Dino. It's really nice to see you again. Thank you, Ms. Morgan.
Keep it up.
Thank you. Well, final question from me. You've been describing the global climate action. Do you drive stick shift, by the way?
No.
Okay, but there's gear 1, gear 2.
I do. Yeah,
right?
I do drive. Yeah.
So
I don't have a car right now, so I don't drive.
So if you have to describe the state of global climate action now, what gear would you say it's at? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? It's definitely not on cruise control. Oh, yeah.
I think it's in 3.
3, yeah. Okay.
I think on the one hand, we've made a lot of progress in, if you look at the costs of renewable energy in the past, if you look at the growing public awareness in different parts of the world, if you look at the commitments that have been made, not always with national laws, if you look at the level of heads of state attention, we see the G20 presidency also having it there. That's all there, but that shift, we're in that part of that gear shift, that's kind of part of it, I think, where it requires that additional, I would say, solarization or fuel to kick it into the next gear. I think we know what we have to do. I think it is also overcoming old politics and moving into the new politics of where we need to go, and we have very little time to do that, which is why collaboration is so fundamentally important. And not, I guess I feel right now we're in this moment where either, I know from a European perspective, the war right now, the Ukrainian war, is very dominant, but it's affecting everyone. And so how do we but step into this moment to accelerate the pace? We see these high energy prices. It should be the moment where we go, okay, it's time to go renewables and efficiency, and make sure that we don't go back into second or first gear.
Well, thank you for that, and I want to thank you for your great efforts, great work, both in your position, also for the German government. I know Germany is one of the very strategic players on climate diplomacy, so we really welcome your visit here and the partnership. And also want to say how much we miss Chancellor Angela Merkel. She was one of my favorite leaders. I like her leadership, her rationality, her boldness, and also her conscientious way of governance. Yeah? I remember how she accepted how many hundreds of thousands or million refugees, which was a politically sensitive issue for any nation, right? But she did it for the right reason.
Yeah.
And things like that. So again, Germany, we count on your leadership, and we hope to see you at the G20, and I hope you have time to enjoy Jakarta a little bit. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's great to be here and look forward to the collaboration from the G7 to the G20. We can really make a lot happen this year.
Thank you. I'm going to send you away with another pantun.
Great.
Four cellists make up a quartet. All dressed up well in white and crimson. Climate crisis is a worldwide threat. Let's solve it through international cooperation. Thank you everybody for watching, and see you in our next public forum.
Thank you, Dr. Dino, for moderating today's session. And once again, thank you, Madam State Secretary Jennifer Morgan, for today's insightful session and a necessary eye-opening climate talk that we need. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to invite everyone here to sign our climate petition as a form of support for climate action through the link that has been displayed in the lower third on your screen throughout the event. It's change.org/daruratiklim, and the link will also be given by the committee through the YouTube chat box. For everyone's information, today's event is available for rewatch on FPCI's official YouTube channel at Sekretariat FPCI. Ladies and gentlemen, that is all for our public forum today. You can follow our social media handles for information about our programs, activities, and events via Instagram or Twitter at FPC Indo. You may also want to go to fpciclimate.org for information about FPCI Climate Unit and our programs. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. We hope to see you at our future programs and events. Goodbye.
Tambayong.
Saya Krisdayanti.
Saya Kalista Iskandar.
Saya Reza Radian.
Saya Ciko Jericho.
Saya Chelsea Islan.
Saya Cinta Laura Kiel.
Saya Dian Sastrowardoyo.
Saya Wulan Guritno.
Saya Julia Stel.
Saya Yoshi Sudarso.
Saya sangat semangat menyongsong Indonesia Emas.
100 tahunnya merdeka pada tahun
2045 nanti.
Kita semua di Indonesia bermimpi dan menginginkan agar bisa mencapai tujuan Indonesia Emas di tahun 2045.
Sungguh suatu capaian sejarah yang indah
dan luar biasa dalam perjalanan bangsa kita.
Nggak kebayang betapa hebatnya Indonesia Emas nanti.
Insya Allah pada tahun 2045 saya akan mulai mewariskan Indonesia kepada putra-putri saya.
Di usia NKRI yang 100 tahun nanti,
saya ingin kita semua hidup dalam Indonesia yang Pancasilais,
yang modern,
maju,
makmur,
sejahtera,
hijau, adil, aman,
bebas korupsi,
demokratis,
dan tentunya bersatu.
Tujuan tersebut bukan tanpa tantangan.
Ancaman terbesar di tahun 2045 bukanlah pandemi.
Bukan lagi kemiskinan atau kebodohan.
Bukan separatisme.
Bukan perang nuklir.
Bukan invasi militer dari luar.
Ancaman terbesar bangsa Indonesia
di tahun 2045 nanti,
the mother of all problems adalah
pemanasan global,
di mana suhu bumi rata-rata akan naik
3-4 derajat Celcius.
Itu adalah suhu terpanas sepanjang sejarah manusia. Suhu terpanas di bumi kita yang sudah berusia 4,5 miliar tahun.
Suhu tinggi akan membuat planet bumi sakit parah.
Saya tidak mau melihat Indonesia Emas dan anak-anak kita nanti
hidup sengsara dalam bumi yang panas ini.
Dengan perubahan cuaca yang ekstrim di mana-mana.
Polusi merajalela dan membunuh puluhan juta orang.
Hujan deras dan banjir di mana-mana.
Gunung es di Antartika terus mencair.
Air laut akan naik setinggi 1 meter.
Sumber air dunia akan berkurang dengan sangat drastis.
Banyak pulau yang akan tenggelam.
Semakin banyak spesies punah yang disebut the sixth extinction.
Keragaman hayati akan rusak, suhu air laut yang naik, ekosistem laut yang terancam, serta terumbu karang yang banyak mati.
Penyakit semakin banyak menyebar, termasuk malaria.
Stok pangan menurun banyak dan kekeringan di mana-mana.
Banyak tanah yang akan menjadi padang pasir tandus.
Dan konflik berbasis lingkungan yang meningkat juga secara drastis.
Semua ini akibat ulah manusia.
Namun, malapetaka ini dapat juga dicegah oleh manusia.
Karena itulah, ayo kita selamatkan Indonesia dari bumi panas.
Mari kita mulai mengurangi emisi gas rumah kaca Indonesia.
Ayo kita kurangi emisi gas rumah kaca 50% di tahun 2030.
Dan kita kurangi terus sampai akhirnya kita bisa mencapai 0 emisi di tahun 2050.
Ayo hijaukan ekonomi kita, jaga hutan kita.
Jaga ekosistem laut kita.
Kembangkan energi bersih dan kurangi segala emisi karbon dalam kehidupan kita.
Sehingga Indonesia Emas 2045 akan hidup dalam bumi yang nyaman, sehat, dan bahagia.
Sehingga Indonesia dapat menjadi bagian penting dalam solusi global perubahan iklim.
Planet bumi harus kita sembuhkan dari sekarang.
Target besar dan mulia ini bisa kita capai.
Ayo kita bergotong royong.
Selamatkan planet bumi.
Selamatkan umat manusia.
Selamatkan generasi kita dan generasi seterusnya.
Kita sambut Indonesia Emas yang penuh harapan.
Selamatkan Indonesia 2045.
Sadarkah Anda, kita mungkin adalah generasi terakhir yang bisa hidup dalam dunia bercuaca normal. Kita juga adalah satu-satunya generasi yang bisa menyelamatkan umat manusia dari bahaya bumi mendidih yang menanti kita selamanya di depan. Ayo kita penuhi panggilan planet bumi, panggilan umat manusia, dan panggilan sejarah. Ayo sebarkan pesan ini dan tanda tangani petisi.